When a president openly pleads with another leader to step away from the hearts of his youth, something far deeper is at play. If you want to know the truth behind this clash, stay here and make sure you subscribe right now, because what unfolds will challenge everything you thought you knew about politics, influence, and fear. It began not in Kenya, but thousands of miles away in Burkina Faso, where a young man named Ibrahim Traoré rose from the shadows of military life to become a symbol of defiance. His speeches were not just words. They were sparks thrown into the dry grass of youth frustration. In village squares, on city streets, and in quiet homes where families gathered around old televisions, his voice carried a promise that the youth could claim their future with their own hands. But promises that travel too far often stir unrest where they are least expected. In Nairobi, President William Ruto watched the growing tide of admiration for Traoré with a careful eye. His advisers whispered of online groups sharing Traoré's words, of Kenyan youth quoting him in protests, and of a growing sentiment that foreign inspiration could ignite a domestic fire. For weeks, Ruto stayed silent, believing perhaps it was just a passing trend. But the whispers became louder, and the crowd quoting Traoré grew larger. One late evening, in the dim light of his private office, Ruto read a report that shook him more than he admitted. It spoke of university students chanting Traoré's name during a rally about job scarcity. It spoke of young activists carrying his photograph in marches calling for leadership change. Ruto's own speeches on economic reform were being compared, unfavorably, to the fiery rhetoric of the man who ruled a land far away. The tension broke when a journalist asked Ruto, during a press conference, if he saw Traoré as a political threat. Cameras flashed, the room held its breath, and for the first time, Ruto let the concern slip. He spoke slowly, but the words were sharp enough to slice the air. He must stop this influence over our young people. It is built on illusions. It is built on lies. He is not what he claims to be. The statement was both a plea and an accusation. To the public, it sounded almost desperate. To Traoré's supporters, it sounded like fear. The headlines the next morning screamed with conflict, a president openly calling another leader a fraud, while millions of young Africans watched, waiting for the next move. Yet behind the sharp words, a deeper question lingered. Why would a leader of one nation feel so threatened by the voice of another? And what did Ruto know about Traoré that the rest of the world did not? Ruto's word did not vanish into the noise of daily politics. They landed like stones in a still pond, sending ripples across two nations. In cafes across Nairobi, the conversations turned sharper. Why is our president so worried about him? Some asked, leaning forward over steaming cups of tea. Others shrugged, saying it was nothing more than political theater. But beneath the casual talk, there was a quiet realization. A leader in Kenya had just admitted that the voice of a foreign president was reaching deeper into the hearts of Kenyan youth than his own. In Ouagadougou, Traoré was briefed on the statement. He listened in silence, his eyes narrowing slightly as his aides read Ruto's words aloud. Those who knew him understood that silence from Traoré was never a sign of weakness. It was the moment before a storm. He had faced military coups, international pressure, and threats from far more powerful leaders. But this was different. This was personal. Instead of rushing to respond, Traoré did something unexpected. He canceled his public appearances for the week. No speeches, no interviews, no casual remarks. The media spun theories. Was he rattled by Ruto's accusations? Was he hiding from the confrontation? Supporters dismissed such talk, saying Traoré was not a man to run from a fight. But in reality, the young leader was preparing something far more calculated. Meanwhile, in Kenya's State House, Ruto paced the length of his private office. His advisers urged him to move past the issue, to focus on domestic matters. But Ruto was restless. He had seen the intelligence reports that the public never would, details of Kenyan activists forming alliances with youth movements in Burkina Faso, exchanging not just ideas but strategies. If these connections deepened, it could become more than a symbolic threat. It could grow into a coordinated political force that he might not be able to control. One particular file on his desk kept drawing his attention. It contained a series of encrypted messages intercepted by intelligence services. The messages spoke of a new African front, a movement that rejected traditional political systems and called for radical reform across the continent. The name Ibrahim Traoré appeared in these exchanges, not as a distant symbol, but as an active participant. Ruto knew that if the public ever saw this evidence, the conversation would shift entirely. No longer would it be about speeches and inspiration. It would be about interference, perhaps even destabilization. But revealing it would also expose his own government's surveillance tactics, something he was not prepared to do. So instead, he waited, watching for Traoré's next move. And then, one night, a video appeared online. It was not an official address. It was not filmed in a palace. It was just Ibrahim Traoré, seated in a plain wooden chair, speaking directly into the camera with a calmness that felt almost dangerous. The video began without music, without banners, without the polished touch of political media teams. There was only a dimly lit room, the soft creak of a chair, and Ibrahim Traoré staring into the lens as if he could see through the screen into the soul of every viewer. His voice was low, steady, and each word landed with the weight of something unshakable. Across our continent, he began, young people are told to wait for jobs, to wait for respect, to wait for freedom, and in that waiting, years are stolen from them. He did not mention Kenya. He did not mention Ruto. But the choice of words felt deliberate, almost surgical. The pauses between his sentences pulled listeners in closer, making them lean forward, as if the truth would be whispered in the next breath. I have heard, Traoré continued, that some fear the unity of Africa's youth. They fear it because it does not serve their power. They call it dangerous. They call it lies. But I tell you this, the greatest danger is not unity, it is silence. Within minutes of its release, the video was shared in student groups, activist circles, and even among disillusioned professionals. In Kenya, those who had followed the recent tension instantly understood the subtext. He was answering Ruto without ever speaking his name, and in doing so, he gave his supporters a rallying cry that no accusation could weaken. In State House, the video played on a large screen before Ruto and his closest aides. The president's face remained expressionless, but his hand tapped the armrest of his chair in a slow, measured rhythm. He recognized the tactic. By not addressing the accusation directly, Traoré avoided the defensive stance and instead reframed himself as a voice of oppressed youth across Africa. It was not just clever. It was dangerous. Late that night, a senior intelligence officer entered Ruto's office with new information. The officer placed a slim folder on the desk and spoke in a tone that carried both urgency and caution. It is not only the words, Mr. President, he said. It is the timing. He has released this on the eve of several coordinated demonstrations in Nairobi, Kisumu, and Mombasa. And we have reason to believe they are being quietly advised by people close to him. Ruto flipped through the pages, each one filled with intercepted communications, meeting notes, and photographs of young Kenyan organizers. Some of the notes hinted at strategies that mirrored recent protests in Burkina Faso, the kind that had helped propel Traoré to power. If this was true, it was no longer about speeches. It was about influence turning into action. And if the demonstration succeeded, the perception of who truly inspired Kenya's youth would shift irreversibly. Ruto leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the folder. If he wants to play this game, he murmured, then we will see who can finish it. The morning air in Nairobi carried an unusual charge. Streets that were usually filled with the shuffle of workers and the honk of matatus now hummed with a steady, growing chant. From Uhuru Park to the edges of the central business district, groups of young men and women poured in, their footsteps forming an unspoken rhythm. The banners they carried bore no political party symbols, no familiar slogans, only short, sharp phrases painted in bold black letters. We wait no more. Silence is death. At the edge of the park, a group of university students stood together, their eyes fixed on a phone screen replaying Ibrahim Traoré's video. The device was passed from one hand to another like a sacred object, each viewer nodding, murmuring, feeling as though the man in the wooden chair had spoken directly to them. No one mentioned Ruto's name, yet everyone understood who these words challenged. Police vans rolled in slowly, their sirens muted, officers stepping out in tight formation. The tension thickened. A young woman with a green scarf tied around her wrist stepped forward, holding her banner high. We are not here for violence, she called out, her voice steady. We are here for truth. Her words were met with cheers, but also with a slow advance of riot shields. Inside State House, Ruto stood before a wide window, binoculars in his hand. From this distance, the protesters looked like shifting currents in a restless ocean. His security chief entered, speaking in clipped tones. "Mr. President, if this spreads beyond Nairobi, containment will be complicated." Ruto did not reply immediately. His mind was not on the size of the crowd, but on the precision of their message. It was not random anger. It was focused, disciplined, and dangerously unified. Midway through the protest, something unexpected happened. From a side street emerged a group of older men and women, many of them known public figures, poets, former teachers, retired journalists. They walked calmly into the crowd, linking arms with the younger demonstrators. This was no longer a youth movement alone. It had become a cross-generational statement, and the presence of respected elders gave it a shield against quick dismissal. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned gold, the chants grew softer, but the determination in the faces remained. A small team of reporters captured the scene, broadcasting it live to millions. And somewhere, far from Nairobi, Ibrahim Traoré watched the footage on a muted television screen, his lips pressed into a faint, unreadable smile. In a private call later that night, one of Ruto's closest advisers leaned forward and said, "Sir, if you do not act now, you will lose a narrative completely. And once you lose that, it will not matter what proof you have. The people will already believe he is their voice." Ruto's reply was quiet, almost like he was speaking to himself. "Then it is time they see the other side of him." For days, the protests continued in waves. They were not constant, but they were persistent, each demonstration fading only to return stronger. Ruto's cabinet urged him to focus on policy reforms, to show the public progress. But the president had already decided. This was no longer about governance. This was about perception, and perception had become his most dangerous enemy. Late one evening, in the secure conference room of State House, Ruto gathered a small circle of trusted officials. The room was dim, the heavy curtains drawn. A large folder lay on the table, marked with the seal of the National Intelligence Service. Without a word, Ruto pushed it toward his defense minister. "This," he said, "is the other side of Ibrahim Traoré." Inside the folder were photographs, transcripts, and what appeared to be financial records. The first image showed Traoré in a private meeting with 3 men in civilian clothing, identified in the intelligence notes as known operatives linked to a controversial foreign security group. Another page displayed bank transfers, routed through obscure accounts in multiple countries, ending in funds allegedly used to purchase military-grade equipment. The defense minister flipped through the evidence with a growing frown. "If this is true, it is explosive," he said. Ruto's reply was immediate. "It does not matter if it is true in every detail. What matters is how it will look when the people see it." The plan was simple in structure but devastating in potential. Leak the documents to select media outlets, frame them as part of a cross-border investigation, and let the public imagination do the rest. The allegations would suggest that Traoré's speeches were not acts of inspiration, but part of a calculated plan to destabilize neighboring governments for his own political gain. Within 48 hours, the first story broke. A respected investigative journalist published a detailed report, complete with scanned images of the documents and anonymous sources claiming direct knowledge of the alleged operations. Headlines flared across news sites. Is Africa's youngest leader a revolutionary or a fraud? In Nairobi, the effect was immediate. Some protesters hesitated, their chants faltering as the accusation spread. Others refused to believe a word, calling it a smear campaign. But the doubt had been planted, and doubt was a seed that grew quickly. In Ouagadougou, Traoré's communications team worked through the night. His spokesperson issued a brief statement calling the allegations fabricated lies designed to weaken African unity. Yet behind closed doors, his aides debated whether to release a full rebuttal or to let the storm pass without giving it legitimacy. Traoré himself remained composed. To one of his closest advisers, he said quietly, "If they have begun this, it means they have no other way to fight me, and that tells me they are afraid." But as he spoke, a separate report arrived on his desk, one that made his expression darken. It was not from his team. It was from a trusted contact in Kenya, and it claimed that the leaks were only the first move. The message from Kenya was brief, but every word felt like it carried the weight of something far more dangerous than a media scandal. It came from a former diplomat, a man who had once moved easily between the corridors of power in Nairobi and the streets where ordinary people gathered. His warning was not about the documents. It was about what would follow. They will not stop at words. The note read, "If the public does not turn against you, they will create a reason for them to do so." Traoré read it twice, his gaze fixed on the last line. He knew enough of political history to understand the pattern. Discrediting a leader was the first step. The second was often to provoke a crisis so severe that blame became inevitable. His mind began to work through possibilities. A staged incident, a violent clash, a manufactured scandal that could be pinned directly on him or his supporters. Back in Nairobi, Ruto's inner circle met again. This time, the tone was sharper, the urgency more pronounced. The leaked documents had shaken public trust in Traoré, but it was not enough. The protests had thinned, yet the most devoted supporters remained unmoved, clinging to his message of unity and defiance. It was those voices Ruto wanted silenced. An intelligence officer laid out the next step on the table, a detailed plan to infiltrate the next demonstration. The goal was not to stop it, but to steer it toward chaos. Hidden among the genuine protesters would be individuals paid to provoke the police, to throw the first stones, to ignite a clash that would spiral into violence. And when the smoke cleared, the headlines would speak for themselves. Traoré's influence turns deadly in Kenya. The plan was approved without a single dissenting voice. Days later, in the heart of Nairobi, the demonstration began like so many before it. Chants, banners, and the low thrum of determination in the air. But then, almost too quickly, the atmosphere shifted. A bottle shattered near a line of officers. Someone shouted, and the sound of running feet broke the rhythm of the crowd. Within minutes, tear gas filled the air. Cameras caught blurred images of masked figures hurling debris, and above the chaos, the voice of a young protester screamed, "They are not with us." By nightfall, the damage was done. News broadcasts replayed the footage in endless loops, framing the violence as a natural result of Traoré's influence. Across the continent, the narrative began to harden. He was no longer just a controversial figure. He was now linked, however falsely, to blood on the streets. In Ouagadougou, Traoré stood at his office window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. His aide asked if he would respond. He did not turn around. "Not yet," he said softly. "When the truth comes, it will not be in whispers." And somewhere, in the quiet corners of both nations, there were those who already knew. This was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning of a much darker game.